My name is Mark. This is Zen Talk, the Eightfold Path. All right. This is Siddhartha Gautama's second sermon. He only had 2 sermons, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So, the Noble Eightfold Path is Siddhartha Gautama's second sermon, and it is based on first understanding his first sermon, the Four Noble Truths. So to understand the Noble Eightfold Path sermon, you have to first understand the Four Noble Truths. Go see my video on the Four Noble Truths. Get rid of my camera here. And the essence of the Buddhist teachings can be summed up in 2 principles, the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. If you understand these 2, you pretty much understand Buddhism completely. All right. The first of this is now going into the Eightfold Path. These are my own interpretations and understandings. So every Zen center, teacher, Buddhist organization will have their own interpretations and understandings. So these will really greatly vary depending on who you're talking to, what organization, and what is their overall view. So my view is always towards the spiritual self, not the physical self, not the external self, not the self that lives in the world and goes to work and has family and houses. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the spiritual self. All right, so the right understanding view. This is sometimes also called right view. How we apply our understanding of our suffering, our spiritual wounds, is absolutely critical so that we may bring to illumination, to view, the spiritual wounds we hold. So in this, like in the picture here, you can be spiritually wounded, but we use the right view, the right understanding to bring to illumination the spiritual wounds we hold. In other words, we have to know of them before we could do anything about them. Okay. Right insight. This would be the second one. The suffering we hold, that we illuminate with our vision, is now revealed in how those spiritual wounds have become malignant, creating a cascade of karma and causation. So we see the spiritual wound, but then we see how the spiritual wound creates lines of karma and lots of causation. So it's like a light in the mirror, where the one light reflects and creates thousands and multitudes of other lights. And then like the shell, you have the point of the wound, but then it's the spiraling manifest around the wound, the causation. Okay. All right. Right doctrine. This is the third. A doctrine is a foundational knowledge that one must hold true. That knowledge that heals our spiritual wound is that of the Four Noble Truths. That would be the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path leading to the end of suffering, which is what we're talking about. So this is the doctrine that we're talking about. We're not talking about any other doctrine. And this is what must hold true. If you do not believe this, then this Eightfold Path will be meaningless to you. So it's sort of, they're chained together. All right. Right renouncement. Our spiritual wounds fester in our dark deeds committed, the cravings we hold, and the longings we feel for this world. Thus we must disembody from these things, which also means liberate, and renounce our held attachments for them. This is also known as right speech. oftentimes this particular part of the Noble Path, it's about lying, or it's about, not telling the truth. But really, it's the festering of the dark deeds we committed, the evil things that we have done that we won't even admit to ourselves. The cravings that we hold that we dare not talk about or have never talked about. The longings that we feel, and we feel bad for having the longings. All of these things create the wounds that fester. And fester means that they boil, they permeate, they grow, they hurt. Thus we must liberate, free ourselves, disembody, and you will see disembody in the sutras a lot, from these things, and renounce our held attachments to them. That's the speech that we're talking about. It's nothing to do with lying or saying bad things. It's really about renouncement. This is the right speech, the right renouncement. Okay. Right unity of wholeness. The spiritual wounds we hold fracture our soul, creating a manifold plurality of what we see as our existence. We must unite that what is fractured in conjoinment to bring about the soul's wholesomeness. This is also called right action. And it's like this puzzle. Our soul becomes fractured, and our mind becomes fractured along with it. And the spiritual wounds almost take on a life of their own. And the fracturing of our own, and you feel fractured, you feel thin, you feel stretched. And this fracturing just permeates our existence, and everything we see is also fractured. So what we unite what is fractured in conjoinment, bringing together all of the fracturements to make the soul whole again. This is called right action. It has nothing to do with an external action or some sort of phenomenal action. It's about the action we take spiritually. Right resolve of salvation. To heal our spiritual wounds and to rejoin the fractured soul, we must make a great commitment, a resolve of salvation, the way out, to rejoin the soul and to end the causes of our festering spiritual wounds. This is also called right livelihood. So a lot of people poorly interpret this right livelihood as what you do to make money, or how do you feed yourself, or how do you nourish yourself. But that's an external view. We're talking about in a spiritual view. How do you nourish, how do you feed yourself in a spiritual world? And we do this by making a commitment. That's the livelihood, a resolve of salvation, to seeking the way out. That's it. That's the right livelihood. And we do this by we make the commitment to rejoin the soul and to end the causes of our festering wounds. If that is not a job in itself, then I don't know what is. All right. Right resolution of unity. We rejoin our fragmented soul to unity, eradicating the causes of the festering spiritual wounds. There, the origin of the true self, the unstained soul, is known before phenomena's arising. This is also known as right mindfulness. Again, unfortunately, many poor translations and people who have, these are often misconcepted or wrongfully understood by people who just simply don't believe. They really don't believe in what the Buddha taught, so they just sort of imply these to be an external set of the Eightfold Path, and something for the external. Right mindfulness has nothing to do with the way that you place your teacups or organize the items on your counter. This has everything to do with the rejoining of our fragmented soul, the eradicating the causes of the festering spiritual wounds, where the origin of our soul, where does the soul come from? This is where we see the true self. And Zen, the true self also means the soul. And the unstained soul is the soul before it was fractured, is known before phenomena's arising, before you were born. So this is the big one here. So the right mindfulness is the bringing this together. It's the focusing, it's the concentration to do this. All right. Right liberation of the soul. The true self, now completed, forever liberated from arisings of phenomena, knows true bliss, eradicated the causes of suffering, and to not be reborn back into the manifold existent suffering, to true self returns to the eternal light. This is the liberation that Buddha was talking about. And, a lot of the true self, the soul, is forever liberated. This is the goal. Now, if you don't believe that there's a soul, then there is nothing to liberate, and there is nowhere to go, which defeats the entire point of the Buddha's sermon. And therefore, why are you here? What's the point? Why are you even listening to this if you don't believe it? Maybe you want to believe, and that could be creating a spiritual wound on you. It's that you don't believe, but you want. So this is the big one. This is the point of why we even do this, is to liberate the soul from the manifold existence of suffering. The true self returns to the eternal light. It's not that we go back to something. It's that we turn around and know who we are. It's really what it is. You're like cleaning mud, or you're rejoining something that was fractured just through the phenomena, and you return to the eternal light. And that's your true self. All right. So that's pretty much the end of the Noble Eightfold Path. So I just got some commentary. So the Noble Eightfold Path is a libertation ontology based in wisdom. That is essentially Buddhism in a nutshell. If someone says, well, what is Buddhism? You can say that it is a liberation ontology based in wisdom. All right, so Siddhartha Gautama, the Shakya Muni, that means the great sage of the Sakya clan, only produced 2 sermons, the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. Everything after that was hearsay in later-day brahmayana, or in this later-day brahmayana is what we call Buddhism, or what is known as Buddhism today. True brahmayana, the path to the absolute, is a liberation ontology based in wisdom. I have said this already. The 2 sermons is about the liberation of the soul from phenomena, this worldly existence. It is unfortunate that the Eightfold Path has been reinterpreted to take an outwardly meaning, for such interpretations are useless and does not help the spiritual seeker reach salvation. So this is what you, the student, should be vigilant, is that when the Eightfold Path is presented to you as an external set of rules of morality, that is a pretty big sign that the teacher or the organization is not following the Buddha's path. They are doing their own thing for their own reasons. And you should maybe remind them of that, But if they become insistent of their ways, then go find a different organization and teacher. All right. So just as there is the noble Eightfold Path, there is also the dishonorable Eightfold Path. In Zen Buddhism, the two sermons are a foundation of the core of our efforts. And without properly understanding them, then everything else is folly, foolishness, and lacks in purpose. To deny the Buddha's teachings is to then say there is no way out of the manifold existence of suffering. And that would suggest that there is nothing to liberate and nothing to be liberated from. This is the nihilism of the Theravadins, who are materialist, a pre-brahmayana philosophy. This is akin to teaching that the manifold suffering existence is all that there is. And it is also saying, just get used to it and learn to like it. The wrong, dishonorable Eightfold Path is often presented to Zen students, for it is based on disbelief and suspicion of the Buddha's teachings and rooted in nihilism. For such teachings themselves and those who teach them only create more spiritual wounds on themselves and others. Evil and twisting of souls they are. And evil in this sense means the intentional infliction of spiritual wounds. So this is a pretty big statement here. If you do not look at the two sermons of Buddha correctly and do not properly understand them, then everything else after that is only going to be, it's going to lack meaning and purpose. It's going to be confusing. You're going to hear it and you're going to go, meh, I'm not quite sure what that means. Or it just leads in further foolishness. People start getting into the forms, the chanting, the ringing of bells, the wearing of robes, the cultural customs that have nothing to do with the path of Buddha. And the foolishness just grows and grows and grows. And it's all based upon the very fact that they don't understand the foundation core of Buddhism, the two sermons. They just don't get it. So to deny the teachings, and this often happens. I've even met famous Zen teachers who deny the teachings, is to say there's no way out. You know, if you go to the teacher and you're saying, so are your words, is what you're saying equal or higher than the Buddha's? And of course they will say, well, no, my words are not equal or higher than the Buddha's. And at that point, you have defeated the teacher, because if the teacher is saying that there's no way out, but the Buddha is saying there's no way out, then who's right? Why are you there? What's the point of you even sitting in front of that man's feet or her feet? You know, this is something that many people come to what I would call a spiritual crisis, is when they realize that they have spent many, many years with the wrong teacher or the wrong school. So when they say there's no way out of the manifold existence suffering, that is to say that there's nothing to liberate. It's the denial of the soul. And it is really sad when I hear Buddhists and other Zen teachers say that there's no soul. And that is a complete misunderstanding, and probably based on a bad translation of the Buddha Sutras, and not understanding the Eightfold Path and not understanding what the point of it is here. It's not that there's no soul. What a lot of the sutras are saying is that, it's anatta, which is, this is not the soul, that is not the soul. That palm tree is not a soul, that dog is not your soul, this rock is not your soul. So what we say is that the soul is not a thing. It's not a external thing. It's not something that you can take out and put on your desk and look at it and and inspect it like a gem or an object. You can't repair it like a broken radio. This is what we're saying, is that this is when we say anatta, which is, it is not this, it's not that, it is not a thing. Also, the soul is they will also say that the soul is not permanent, which means that it's not a fixed thing. It's not, the body that you live in now changes, and it always changes from, you're not the same person when you were a baby, you're not the same person that you were when you were 10 years old or a teenager, and you're not going to be the same person in the future as you grow old. And you're definitely, after you die, you won't be the same person. So this is what we mean by there's no soul. Well, that is a misunderstanding. And to say that then is to deny the Buddha's teachings. And if you truly believe that there's no soul, then I would really question, why are you even on this path? Maybe you need to go back and take a look at, your what's going on inside you, because the Buddha does teach the liberation of the soul. So then, when they say there's no soul, then there's nothing to liberate, and then there's nothing to be liberated from. So it's a denial. And unfortunately, the Theravadins do not believe in a soul. They would deny that a soul exists. And so therefore, if there's no soul and there's nothing to escape from, there's nowhere to go, there's no nirvana, which would be the liberation of the soul from phenomena existence. And this is a pre-brahmayana. The Theravadins existed well before the Buddha came about. And they looked at this world as all that there is. All that you see is all that there is. That's pretty much how they looked at this world. And in a sense, they very much like the Vajrayanists were looking at favorable rebirth. Well, since there is nowhere to go other than this phenomenon in existence, which they would say in the Vajrayana, it's the wheel of life. You exist in these various realms, and maybe we'll get into that in a different video. The Theravadins had this kind of a similar view of the Vajrayanist, in that you just more or less can determine what your next rebirth or your incarnation will be. And again, it's not really what the Buddha taught. It's kind of a bastardized version. I always say that the Theravadins are to Buddhism as Mormons are to Christianity. It's kind of that way. So in a sense, if you believe that there's no soul and there's no way out, there's nothing to liberate, nothing to be liberated from, then you're just basically saying, well, I'll just get used to this manifold existence suffering world, and I'll just learn to like it. This is the old joke of, learn to love the nuclear bomb. It's sort of like, I'm just going to learn to love my terrorist. I'm going to learn to love my monster. I'm going to learn to love my suffering. This is not the Buddha's teachings. I'm sorry. So that's why I call a lot of this the dishonorable Eightfold Path, because it many times in Zen students will present the wrong dishonorable Eightfold Path as the Eightfold Path, and it comes to them from their teachers or their teachers' teachers, or from the organization itself through mistake and folly of disbelief and suspicion of the Buddha's teachings. These are from people who either they just never believed in anything the Buddha said, or they were suspicious of the teachings. In other words, they just didn't trust them, or they didn't understand them. And it's rooted in nihilism. And a lot of times nihilism can come from confusion or the infection from the Theravadins, or people already had a predisposition towards nihilism. Sometimes you see it a lot with the sophists. You see it a lot with people who are very intellectual. They get very nihilist. Because when you start saying, oh, there's a soul, well, they start looking at you like, oh, you're a Christian nutcase. And I understand that the Christians overplay the whole thing of the soul, and sometimes some of the stories that the Christians talk about are extremely silly. But then again, you kind of can hear the same thing in more of the other Buddhist schools. The Pure Land schools definitely get into a better rebirth for the soul, or that you're going to go to the Amida Buddha heaven or at the feet. So it's not like you won't hear these things in Buddhism, or you won't hear sort of this misuse or this misapplication of the words of the soul. And I can understand how this can create spiritual wounds and suffering in other people. I'll go over here, take this off. So the Buddhists, so again, a lot of the Eightfold Path wrongfully interpreted or wrongfully applied is based upon disbelief, suspicion of the Buddhist teachings, and nihilism. For such teachings themselves and those who teach them only create more spiritual wounds, on themselves especially, and on others. And it's one thing to create your own spiritual wounds. It's like, well, people say, well, at least I'm only hurting myself. But when what you're doing actually is affecting others, that is true evil, the intentional infliction of spiritual wounds. So people who do this, who intentionally create spiritual wounds on themselves and others, they are evil and twisted. They're evil and twisting of souls. They are. And that's sort of a broken speech, but I've seen this too often in this bottom part here with people who they think that they're teaching Buddhism, but they're not. They think that they're teaching Zen, but they're not. And all they are doing is twisting of souls. They're creating more. And it's something that happens a lot more than you think. All right, that's the end of my talk on the Eightfold Path. Thank you, and please remember to like and subscribe.